try to keep it here to 30 minutes because I know that everyone's time is very valuable and we want to make sure we get all of this information in. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat window. If we don't have time during today's presentation to answer them, we will also get back to you by email with any of the questions that you have. So again, today's topic is really about the adoption of Office 365. Either all or most of you may already have Office 365, and you may use just Office Pro Plus or just Exchange, but there are so many other tools included. And you'll notice here on this graph that Office Pro Plus and Exchange are at the top of the list. Over 80% of the users of Office 365 use those two tools. But then there's OneDrive and SharePoint and OneNote and Skype for Business and Teams and Power BI and Yammer. And the adoption of those tools certainly is less than those of Exchange and Office. But there are so many more tools beyond that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But really, the value of Office 365 really comes when you start changing your work processes or you use the tools within Office 365 to help make your work processes more efficient. And so as Gartner does their research, they see that every day. And so we want to make sure that we're helping you make those tools become part of how you do business. And quite honestly, every organization has a bit of what we call a product adoption curve. And if we look at the next slide, you'll see that, and we all know this, right, so that we have people within our organizations who are those tech enthusiasts. They're always the first ones to get to the gadgets. They always have the newest phone, and they're always looking forward to new tools to get their job done. And those are the innovators. And if we go along the curve and we see the biggest group of the folks in our organizations, they're the early majority. Maybe you have some folks who are a little bit more conservative. And then finally you have those skeptics. Those skeptics are the people who say, hey, listen, I'm doing this the way I'm doing this, and it's not broken. So I don't necessarily see the need for having to fix it. But what Gartner has seen is that there are individuals in your organization who are ready for change, but the company as a whole is not. Really what we're trying to do is help you help those users along the curve. And so it's all about how you do things better using the tools that you already own. So one of the things that we see, and here's a quote, if you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If you don't, you'll find an excuse. And I think we can all agree that that is the case. You'll see that people are collaborating in your organization, and those people have a way to get their job done. It may not necessarily be the way that you expect them to get the job done, or if they are using the tools you want them to use. And sometimes we question whether or not we know the applications that are in use in our organization. If you did an inventory of all those things that are in use, and if you really asked those users, hey, are you using Box.com, or are you using Dropbox, are you using ShareFile? You'll be surprised at the number of people who say, yes, I am. And quite honestly, then you may not know where your corporate data is going, and is it still as secure as you may want it to be. So if people need to get their job done, they're going to find a way to do it. We worked with a client a couple of years ago that had a process that included a review process of documentation and legal terms for contracts. It was a multi-step process. It went across several people over a long period of time. Working with both the management team and the staff, it was very evident that the process wasn't uniform across the organization, and it hadn't been adequately defined or documented. So it took several months for that organization to go through the tedious task of understanding what exactly they were doing, what they needed to do, and how that applied to their own internal compliance process. There were pockets of users who expressed, hey, it's not broken, why are we changing this? While others understood that it was a much more efficient way to manage the process than what they were doing through just email correspondence and spreadsheet trackers and those sorts of things. So by us showing them the tools and how they can be used to collaborate, track their processes, provide the right access to the data, we help them define the user's roles and help them to manage the change along the way. And that's really what we need to do. So we look at some of the common mistakes that are made as people are starting, as organizations are starting to deploy Office 365 and deploy the tools that are included. So Office 365, and Bill will go through this a little bit later, includes so many tools that you may or may not know already exist, that you are already paying for, and how you might be able to use those within the company. So some of those are, the first one is the lack of support from leadership teams and departments. That's number one. Whenever you change anything within an organization, you need a champion, and that tends to need to be from a department head or somebody on the leadership team. Number two, sometimes we're not communicating the reason and the need for change, and sometimes we're not getting the feedback from the folks who are actually doing the job and getting those business cases that help us to communicate those reasons. Sometimes they're compliance reasons, sometimes they're corporate reasons, but sometimes it just comes from, hey, we could do this better, we could serve our clients better, those kinds of things. So communication is big. Now, sometimes Office 365 gets implemented and all the tools are there, but nothing else really happens. So we just switch it on and let people find what they find. So switching it on is not quite enough. We need to do something more. Also, we don't define the process behind those tools. There's lots of tools. There's so many different ways to use them. But what does the organization want? How does that fit into the process? How should OneDrive be used versus how SharePoint is used? So defining that is really important. We also sometimes underestimate our employees' resistance to change. It's easy to not change. It's easy to stay in the way we do things because it is almost muscle memory in how we do our jobs. So how do we help our employees, our staff members, use these tools in a way that becomes their new muscle memory? But when we're doing our training, we do find that not everyone learns the same. So let's make sure we are applying methods so that everyone in the organization has the opportunity to learn. And finally, we don't always measure what's working. So once we put all of this in place and everything's great and it all is working the way we want it, does it still work a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? We need to measure that and make sure we're continuing on a path of efficiency. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and he's going to go through some of these common mistakes and how you can help to overcome these as you're deploying Office 365. Bill?
Thank you, Jean. Really quickly, it's come to my attention that some people are having a hard time seeing the slides. So if you could, if you are seeing the slides, please respond in the chat window to let us know if you're having some problems, and I will have someone address it as soon as we can. Moving on to the next slide. One of the really nice quotes here: successful leaders see the opportunities in every difficulty rather than the difficulty in every opportunity. Reed Markham. This helps with the problem of lack of support from leadership and teams and departments. One of the solutions to the lack of support is to have a sponsor. Sponsors are the ones who should be launching change effects and their involvement sends a strong signal to the rest of the organization. If the sponsor is active and visible in their support, the organization notices. Likewise, if the sponsor announces the change and then disappears, individuals in the organization see this equally strong signal. The effectiveness of the sponsor is one of the strongest predictors of a project success or project failure. It is important to effectively define roles, responsibilities, and relationships for your project management resources. Problem number 2, not communicating the reason and the need for the change. Office 365 adoption projects can often fail when reasons and need for change have not been communicated to the employees and managers multiple times. And that's one of the keys to point out here, that communication needs to be pointed out multiple times. As part of the solution, you know as an organization has successfully built awareness when all of your employees are able to confirm that they understand the nature of the change and why the change is needed. This communication requires the business drivers of opportunities that have resulted in the need for change, why a change is needed now, and the risk that is involved in not implementing this change. Research has shown that employees have a strong preference to hear all business-led messages from very senior staff and personal messages from their own line manager or department head. All key messages must be communicated over and over throughout your entirety of the project. In fact, it is said to have communication go out 5 to 7 times to be the most effective. Problem number 3, switching it on is not enough. Realizing the benefit of Office 365 depends on people changing how they work. Because Office 365 impacts how people do their jobs, there are human factors that directly contribute to or constrain the ROI of Office 365. There are 3 human factors that define the people side of ROI: the speed of adoption, the ultimate utilization, and the proficiency. Simply put, in order to overcome these issues, you must undertake some employee research. By understanding the pain points of your end users, you can help identify the gaps in their knowledge bases and help to align certain technologies within the Office 365 stack to their requirements, meaning they will use and adopt the technologies once they understand them. Problem number 4, no process definition behind tools. How many people really know all that's available in Office 365? What plan do you have? Which of these applications do you use? Better question, which applications do all the people in your organization use? How do you get the most out of Office 365, and how do you ensure that your users do as well? What are you paying for that isn't being used? These are all great questions to be looking at when you're looking at Office 365. To help with that, you want to take the time to define each enabled application with your organization. Make sure that when you are defining the applications, that you use organization-specific examples to help your employees embrace new tools. Now, this is a great little chart that you can look at, and I want to touch base on a few of the items here. But you would take Stream, for example. You can compare that over to YouTube. Or if any company out there uses Slack, look at converting over to Teams. It does everything that Slack can do, and it's growing on a daily basis. Power Apps. You can create forms in Office 365 that are also mobile friendly. There's a lot of little applications here that help with specific areas in your organization, whether it's across the business platform or project management or collaboration. Problem number 5, underestimating employee resistance to change. Now, this is a great little comic here. Nobody wanted the wheel at the beginning, but now we all can't live without them. It is a mistake to think that resistance won't occur. Change is like a grieving process, and expect and prepare to face denial, anger, confusion, and crisis. But employees can be helped through this process to reach and accept new confidence. Employees who are highly invested in their current way of working, namely via convoluted workarounds, ultimately they have found a way to work and they want to stick with it. They collaborate and share using other technologies that you may not be aware of, or maybe you are, but you have no way of managing them. And they have invested their time in doing this with no support from the organization. In many cases of a failed Office 365 change and adoption project is employees who expect more work as a result of the change. Their logic is thinking along the lines of, it's going to be more difficult. It's going to make my job harder, or I'll have to migrate my documents to the new system, all of which they see as a time constraint that they don't think they have. Now, the solution to this is has a few different steps to it. You can prepare an FAQ. We find that the immediate reaction to change could be panic, apprehension, questions, or avoidance. Try to anticipate likely questions and fears and prepare an FAQ so you're ready to deal with the initial wave of panic. Say what's happening, why it's happening, and how it will affect them, and circulate this FAQ to all of the staff. Create evangelists. Every office/team has a spiritual leader who may not necessarily be the manager, but this person has others' opinions of their team members valued and trust, and they are respected. Identify and engage these influencers and turn them into your evangelists so they can spread the word and influence other groups. Create clarity and remove uncertainty. Change is a journey, and don't make it a mysterious journey. Set out a clear roadmap of dates, milestones, and key tasks to complete the change to remove uncertainty and the fear of the unknown. Listen, empower, and involve your users. Part of the reason that some people fear going on a plane is a loss of control. It is a similar fear in change. Give staff some control by inviting feedback and suggestions and inviting the volunteers to help with the change. Throughout the entire project, you should always be giving praise. By praising and promoting success stories throughout the project, you will ultimately see a decrease in any resistance from across the organization as a result. And the last item, own up to past and present mistakes. Honesty and owning up to these mistakes is one of the best ways to melt this resistance. Problem number 6, providing one-size-fits-all training or no training at all. Commonly, companies across Office 365 broadcast links to training materials and call it mission accomplished. They forget that for employees, embracing better tools means changing established working habits. All these people have different ways of learning. You have your visual learners that require visual content such as infographics and video content. You have your audible learners that are classroom-based learning and training guides. You have your tactile learners, learn by touching and doing in a hands-on environment. And then you also have to deal with an age gap. Millennials tend to have an easier time adapting to newer technology. Problem number 7. Oops, sorry, I jumped ahead. Whoops. Solution to the training. There are 2 action items here. First is to identify what training is needed. You can do this by conducting an internal survey using Office 365 forms to identify high-value activities that need specific support and share the results to provide value and context for training. You will also need to understand the pain points to your end users to help to identify the gaps in their knowledge bases and align them with the right tools. Identify specific scenarios appropriate to different teams and leverage those to increase user adoption. Focus training on individual teams, desired outcomes, and tailor these sessions to their requirements. By sharing success stories as part of the training, you will reinforce the message that the change is right for the organization, and it can be fairly easily adopted. How to provide this training? Create a training portal that hosts links and documents to internal and external information. These links or documents should link to white papers, videos, training guides, how-tos, and more. Host a lunch and learn sessions on different topics, weekly or monthly, depending on the immediate need and the urgency of being able to educate your users. We can also use third-party tools or third-party apps that are built right into Office 365. And we are proud to say that we have partnered with Visual SP to help with the adoption of Office 365. Visual SP is a browser-based SaaS application that directly integrates with the entire Office 365 suite. Visual SP provides video tutorials, documents, and screenshots directly into the Office 365 interface. Visual SP can also be customized and based on your permission level, meaning if you have the correct permission to create a new email, a SharePoint list, a new team within Teams, or even a new flow in Microsoft Flow, the app will give you the correct information to create these items. You can also customize your own walkthroughs using Visual SP to help with different policies or procedures within the Office 365. For example, if you have employees entering their time in a SharePoint site, then you can create a custom step-by-step walkthrough of the steps to complete this entry. Problem number 7, not measuring to see what is or isn't working. Microsoft provided the solution in the March of 2016, releasing the Office 365 Adoption Content Pack in Power BI in response to demand from customers to know more about how users are adopting and consuming the Office 365 platform and the associated tools. Choose criteria and set KPIs that help you show the impact of Office 365 is having on your organization to the leadership teams. By looking at the usage statistics within Office 365, gaps in user knowledge can be identified. Business scenarios can be created, and certain cross-sections of the organization can be targeted with specific training to help drive usage and consumption of unused applications within Office 365. Now I hand it back over to Jean for some takeaways.
Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate it. And if there are any questions, certainly put those in the chat window. Again, you probably already have the link in the chat window to the presentation, but we'll be sure to get that out via email as well. We did want to just wrap it up today. We're getting close to our half an hour with some takeaways for you. And we really want to make sure that some of the things that you're thinking about as you're taking on Office 365 or deploying some of the other tools that perhaps you're not using today is start defining some of those collaboration processes that you have within your organization. Start identifying areas that could in fact be more efficient than they are today, and maybe some of the tools that are included can help you implement ways to do things better. Also, talk to your users. See what tools they are using today. They may be using tools within Office 365. They may be using external tools. You want to find out why they're using them, what they're using them for, what kind of data is being transmitted through those tools, and see if there are ways that you can use your Office 365 licensing to make those things happen. Evaluate. We always talk about proof of concept. Evaluate the tools and to determine which fit the workflow of the organization. There are lots of tools out there. There's Teams, there's to-do lists, there's Planner, there's Project. Those are all part of Office 365. They all have some of the same functionality or similar functionality. Some of them can be integrated together, and how should you use that? So evaluation is a big part of that. And then start with some governance and start defining the use of those Office 365 tools, define how they work within the processes, and then provide that training for the users. And using tools like Visual SP, you can help train on not only how to use the tool, but what the organization's process is, making sure you're building that documentation right into the use of the applications as the user is interacting with them. Provide those resources for self-help. Makes a big improvement in the daily work life. And finally, monitor how the tools are being used and what can be done better. And of course, if there's any help that you need in any of the deployment of these tools, IV4 is always available to answer any questions or help you as you need. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate the 30 minutes that you have given us. And if there are any questions, we are happy to answer them for you. And we look forward to talking to you all very shortly.